Hi, Trista. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
That music was really exciting, and
I
my heart
know
started pounding.
it's so cool. Yeah, we wanted to try something different for the AP North event this time round, and we've had live chat this morning with Stephen Hope and Ben Whitaker, and I'm really honoured and super grateful that you agreed to join me this afternoon, to finish our event off. So yeah, welcome, Trista, and people have started to join the live chat, which is great. Just a reminder to people who are listening in, you should be able to see a comments box or a comments tab, usually on the right hand side of the screen. So if you could bob us a hello in the chat and let us know you're there, that would be great. And throughout the chat, I'm going to talk to Trista for about 45 minutes. At any point, if you have questions or comments, please leave them in the chat, and we'll, if you've got questions, then we'll definitely try to answer them, and I'll pitch them as part of what we talk about. So welcome, Trista. Thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, it's such an honor to be here. And I was thinking 45 minutes, that could be really long for some, but I think, we could probably talk endlessly about this. And this is my passion. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm really honored to be invited. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Trista. So people do have a bit of an idea that you are over in Canada, and we wanted to chat all about coaching and mentoring. So I think it'd be really useful if you did a little intro to you and what you're doing and where you are in the world, just so people can get an idea.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Trista, and I am located in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, which is the nation's capital. And I have a connection to the UK, actually. I lived there for 5.5 years, as you can tell by my strong British accent. That's where I lived. I lived in London and also in Kent. So had a great experience growing up there. And my sister's still in London right now with my niece and nephew. Who am I and what do I do? That's always like an interesting question, because I feel like I have my fingers in a lot of different pots. So I'll give you a bunch of them. I do identify a bit as a pracademic, so it's a term that we've been playing with a lot with some colleagues. But the idea of situating myself both in the academic world and also in the practice world. So currently, I work as a part-time professor at the University of Ottawa, supporting Bachelor of Education teachers. And also in the graduate program, I teach a course called Mentoring and Coaching in Professional Context. So that might be useful here in this chat. I also work as a project director for the ARC Education Project, and that's a social movement. It's a professional learning network for international, and we have 7 systems. So we do support Wales, Scotland, and Ireland as part of that group, with Iceland, Nova Scotia, Uruguay, and Saskatchewan. So it's a group, and we do coaching systems. So the ministers of education coaching one another, heads of unions, and we bring in some thought leaders to give us some ideas, and we learn from one another. So it's a network that we build on. And then the third thing that I work on is as a project manager in the province of Quebec. So for those of you who don't know Canada and where I'm situated, Ottawa sits on the border of Quebec. And so from 2000, I was a teacher at the Western Quebec School Board. So even though I live in Ottawa, I would travel across the bridge and teach in the Quebec system. And so Canada doesn't have a national education system. Every province is very different. So I work and teach teacher education in Ontario, but I support teachers over in the Quebec side. So using 2 totally different curricula, two totally different approaches. And in that role, I support all English school boards across the province of Quebec around a project called Teacher Mentorship and Educational Leadership. So it's a brand new project, really exciting. We've just been meeting, and we're trying to figure out how do we support teachers all the way through their careers, all the way into college and higher ed as well. So that's kind of where I am, and happy to talk about any of those ideas that have come up.
Yeah, no, I think what you do so much stuff, and it's really, really interesting for us to talk. We'll dive into some of the research that you've done, and what's kind of been coming out of that, because in the UK we have we have a lot of people over the last few years, or a lot of colleges the last few years, that have started to put coaching and mentoring systems and structures in place. Schools have been doing it for probably quite a long time, and there's lots of different strategies and structures and programs out there. But specifically today, a lot of the people that will be joining us and listening are from FE colleges or FE and HE colleges in the UK, where there are usually, or there are some roles where we have coaches, or we have advanced practitioners that help to coach and mentor other teachers. And I think they'll just be really interested in some of the research and some of our thinking and your thinking around coaching and mentoring, and how that can be really effective. So I mean, you take us to where it's probably logical to start in your journey. Where did you start, or not, maybe not the right at the beginning, but what's the journey that you've been on in terms of looking at coaching and mentoring in education?
Sure. So I think teachers are natural mentors, and that is something that I did take up from the beginning. So starting in my early first years teaching in a secondary school, mentoring became part of the process for the other teachers. And I kept thinking, we need to look at more structured approaches to mentoring. And so when I became a vice principal, I was charged with supporting all our new colleagues to the school system. And so we would meet on a regular monthly basis, every 2 weeks sometimes, to support them and mentor them as a community, as a network. And from there, I started thinking, we really do need something even more structured, because what if people are in schools or places and don't have access to somebody who's meeting regularly? Because it became a really important part of our experience together throughout the year, learning and supporting one another and having someone to contact. Mm-hmm. And so that brought me to proposing at our school district level that we think about a mentoring program. And so it was already in the works. There were some basic induction, so new entry level. You go to a professional learning session when you first come in, but I wanted to think about how it could be sustained across the board. So that brought me to mentoring. And so I took on that role and started thinking about how do we join the professional learning and the mentoring and make it in a more structured format. And after that experience, I kept thinking, people have to be doing this somewhere. Like, I can't keep making this up. Like, there have to be books and strategies. So we need to figure out who's doing it well. How do we know how to sift through all of the documents and the ideas? Because it's understood so differently in very different places. And what do you actually do as a mentor? That was one of my drivers. And then that sort of sparked my interest in the PhD journey. So I started to look at mentoring specifically. And as soon as I entered the world of mentoring, I realized coaching was an area I hadn't quite considered. So using my school district as a case, I used that as a qualitative case study of mentoring and coaching. And we together started developing, what does mentoring mean? What does coaching mean? And from there, I branched out. I met a lot of people on Twitter. My coaching community blew up really through Twitter. And that was great, because it wasn't happening much in my context. And I didn't know people in Canada too much. So I had more of an international span. Yeah. And I think it's been a bit more refined over the time. Like, how you define those two terms has been really important to me and to my context. And then also, how do you take all of the different offerings and adapt it to make sure it's in your context and that people understand what to do and how to do it well. That's kind of where I am.
It's really interesting, and I want to pick up on all of those things, because excuse me, like you said, something that we maybe don't always do is treat our coaching and mentoring practice as a case study, if you like, and that's kind of a nice structure to hang it on, if you like, thinking about the way that we do things. And if we often in education have to make a case for something to then have it funded, again, or prove the impact of something, and actually setting it up as a case study, whether it be in a department or whether it be as a whole college. I think that's kind of the flavour of a lot of the people that are involved in the AP Connect project, which this event is part of. They are carrying out mini research projects back at their colleges. And what's it's been really useful, and I'm just sort of thinking about how you mentioned Twitter there. A lot of the people who attend AP Connect and sort of access support from people in similar roles, it has come about through Twitter. And I know from the work that I've done over the last couple of years with the building of communities, Twitter acts as that real place to inspire people to join you, and people are always there looking for others to connect with. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons that we connected and became friends, is that we're both about how we bring people together and how we can really use that space to really amplify what people are doing. So yeah, I'm really interested then in that idea of how you define coaching and mentoring. And have you found that you mentioned context? Have you found that it's important to define those terms at a local level?
Absolutely. So the one preface and the element that keeps emerging for me is the importance of context and making sure no matter what program or approach you're going to use, that it's flexible enough to be adapted based on an iterative feedback. So do the people who are doing the work, how are they learning from one another, and how are they making sense of these ideas, and that it's not rigid. So that's really important, that we take the feedback from the actual people who are using it and engaged in this work, and that we develop these ideas together. So it's owned by us, not done to us, is really important. And that often happens in a lot of these contexts, right? And that we really do define the terms. So I think there's a lot of literature out there that does define it. So you'll see that the words are often used interchangeably, and some people see, coaching as a coach approach as a part of mentoring, or mentoring comes into coaching. I see them as two distinct stances, so that they're both really valuable and important, and they require that relationship. So you absolutely need a strong, positive relationship to have it be effective, but that you do different things when you're mentoring than when you're coaching. Yeah. And so for me, it was important for us to really break that down. And that was one of the first things we did as a community. So I would bring all of our groups of experienced teachers who are taking on that role. We called it initially a mentor role, and we shifted to mentor coach role, because we wanted to clarify that those two terms were actually distinct. So you're a mentor coach, and we would start to define the terms ourselves, and I would use the research and the literature to give some ideas about what's out there as well. And once we had a clear understanding of the two terms, then it was like, how do you shift between the two? Because it really depends on who you're working with, what they need, the expectations, the process, where they are in their journey. I often get, asked, so in our case, we would assign a mentor coach to every single person that came in that was new to the context. So some people had, 25 years experience. I certainly wouldn't presume to be their mentor initially. I would take more of a coaching stance, because they have a lot of expertise. And the same would go with maybe someone's brand new, because we're colleagues. So how do you shift? And then I think mentoring often becomes a little more informal. It's usually you choose your own mentors.
Okay.
So terminology really does matter, and how we understand it, I think, is really important, and thinking through what that means.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how many, and I'd be interested if people put comments in the chat, maybe, how many people have had those conversations back at their colleges about, what is the definition of coaching and mentoring for their specific context? Is that shared across the college or across the setting? Also, what is popping around in my mind is where the space is at the minute to have those conversations between the people who are attending this type of event. So, where are people having those conversations about their experiences of coaching and mentoring, and what are their personal opinions or thoughts or evaluations on previous experiences, can they articulate how they move between coaching and mentoring? And my brain's just gone all over the place with really interesting questions, because I'm not sure that we do that enough at the minute.
I don't think so. And I think it's also confusing in the literature, because if you start looking, there are different ways that people are thinking about the two terms. But I think ultimately what matters is that you have a clear understanding, and that it's clear to the person that you're working with, that what does this role look like? What are their expectations? And for the research participants in my study, I found it fascinating that for them, mentoring really wasn't a problem. So how we see mentoring is really telling, providing examples, sharing their experience. But whereas coaching is really like asking the questions, holding up the mirror so someone shines the light onto their own experience. So you're not giving the answers, it's entering with curiosity and asking those questions. But the coaching stance took them about 3 years to really start figuring out how to be effective coaches, whereas they found being an effective mentor happened early. But I found it fascinating that you think about it. Okay, so if we're saying that mentoring and coaching is useful in both of those roles, but it takes longer to become an effective coach, but we know that effective coaches can really make a difference. When you're just learning, you're not at your best, right? So someone's experienced that, because it's that whole, flying a plane while building it. So you're learning how to coach while coaching, and that's important to your journey, but someone's having that experience. So they may not have the best coaching experience, because you've just learned. So that impacts how they experience the whole program. And they could be like, no, they were just mentors. They just told me everything. I didn't want them to be doing that. And then that's their experience. And so when they leave, they might not have had the best coaching process experience, because we are not certified coaches at our district. It is too costly for us at the moment. We don't have enough time. People are being assigned that role, and then the next day they start it. So what does it mean? People need access to these resources, and there's just so much out there. Where do you start is the giant question.
Yeah, and it is the same here, in that people have had experience of supporting others, but often we're not trained to do that, or we haven't gone through a particular process. Like you say, there's no certification as such usually before you get a coaching role. And as you said, it's very often that we learn on the job. We learn as we go, and so that, I suppose, brings about a very personalized approach. So each coach will have a different style, different flavor, and we're kind of exploring what that practice is and means to us as we navigate that. But also it's hard, because we're trying to support people.
That's right.
Supporting humans.
And there's a lot at stake, right?
Yeah.
And it could be a really challenging experience for them. One thing that we found was very useful is developing these communities and networks. So professionally learning networks for the people who are doing this work. And together, one of the first things we did, so our program's like 10 years old now, right? So at the very beginning, we were just trying to figure this out together. And so one of the key areas that we looked at was, what do these competencies look like for the people themselves? And so we would do self-evaluations based on our own competencies that we defined as a collective. And how do we learn and ask questions together? How do you bring in people who are experts in coaching, for example, to provide us some input? And then you could take it away and try it and come back and see, did it work? How did you adapt it? What questions are really working for you? How do we share our resources? But you do need structured support, and you need to have resources for coaches. They do need to have, some people are really great about reading all the literature on their own. We used a lot of like Michael Bungay-Steiner's books were great, like just starting place to get you thinking about the coaching mindset. Your advice is not as good as you think it is. It's a good guide, and helping's not always helping. And so, but how are the questions? And that was a really easy, quick read to help us think. But we also looked at Growth Coaching International. We've looked at instructional coaching. We've looked at evocative coaching. We've looked at transformational coaching. So we've been pulling in all the work that other people have been doing to see like what can we adapt and take and use in our context, and how do we understand it together as a community. So those networks are really important to bring coaches together.
So important. And I think that's what people have really valued and appreciated about the communities and the networks that we've been building over the last, quite a few years as part of AP Connect. And then that organic growth as well. There's been lots of people, approaching to say, we really want to share that space. We really want to learn from each other. And I think what's popping in my mind is thinking about how we really efficiently and effectively learn together, maybe around some of those different types of coaching approaches or different models, and how we process them. And that's the important bit, isn't it? It's we generally, what you find is anyone who's a coach is usually quite a reflective practitioner themselves, and therefore being able to reflect on their experiences and the different types of people and the different tools and approaches that we've used is really powerful for other people to read or listen to. And I think there's probably more conversations there that need to be had, so that we are processing our experiences out loud. Because I'd say a lot of that we maybe don't always speak out loud. We process it on our own. Maybe sometimes we talk to other people if we like to talk things through. I'm definitely that type of person. But yeah, really sort of useful to think about how we work together to really process some of those models. What have you seen then, Trista, in terms of what are the things that you or your networks have kind of come across that have been really beneficial from a coaching development point of view?
So tools in particular?
Tools or concepts or models or, yeah.
So we started with, we purchased a mentoring kit from the United States. And initially, and I don't know if you may not know the context, but Canada and the US, we're neighbors, but distinct. So there's sometimes, you need to really make it contextual to what will work in our own area. And so we kind of started with that as a place. So I highly recommend just starting with something as a base, as a build on. And maybe this is just, I'm not attached to any particular thing in general. I think what's really important is that you have at least a few people who are taking that leadership role. So in our case, I started as the coordinator. So that would be a group of us and pulling a few people who are really interested in being part of something to guide this process. So some of our early mentor coaches, and we would get together to figure out what do we want to look at next. And so sometimes they would take the lead in sharing different things. So that could be, that book I just talked about. We did book studies. That was really useful. So taking one of the books, like maybe Better Conversations, that is something. So that was Jim Knight's work. So that helped them think through, but it also gave a structure for the process. We used the growth model as a starting place and practiced it together, and then had people head off and come back and say, did it work? Did it not work? We looked at solution focused questions. Laura Lipton's work around coaching. So we started just seeing who's out there and what does this mean, and having different people come in and talk to us as a group and do the professional learning, like practice it together. Having hard conversations with Jennifer Abrams was great, just because in mentoring and coaching, sometimes that is part of it, feedback. How do we do feedback and do feedback well? Coaching questions is really important. And where do you build the space for people to have ownership? So it although it sort of started with a team, I think the goal is that the people own it themselves. Totally. And when people own their own professional learning network. So, you start saying, what do you want to know next? Like how can we help you? Who do we want to pull in? Do you want to know more about asking questions? Do you want to know more about different models that are out there? How do we do that so you're meeting the needs? And then as the research started going, as my research happened later on in our journey, our 10-year journey, we started seeing that there needed to be differentiated approaches too. Yeah. So there were times to bring people who've been doing it for a long time. They were like the key, right? Like if you're new, you want to know someone who's on their 4th year, like what are the nitty gritty? What did they learn? Like what happens if relationships were not going well? What strategies do they have? So that was a really important leadership component. So having them lead the session. Yeah. But then that group kept saying, well, we also want something new. Like we're really engaged, reflective people, and you can't give us the same stuff that we've been seeing for 3 years. Like what's for us? So having a differentiated professional learning network became really important. So so we started dividing it like for people who are new to the process, people who are more experienced, and then leadership opportunities are really important. I'm trying to think about what else. I think the structure is fundamental, of course. Like it's really having a plan, and how do you resource that is always the question. How do you pull people together? They all did it on their own time, but then it became embedded in the district. So eventually,
and it's always that question, like how do we fund the work? How do we create the space, create the time? And it is, it's a biggie. In that we often find that this type of work can happen above and beyond what we already do, because we're conscientious professionals that want to do the best job that we can. But yes, where there are projects like AP Connect, there are at least some efforts being made to make some real inroads to what that looks like, and bringing people together and people sharing their projects, which is really invaluable. So I'm interested then in anything, other things that have come up in your research about, I know you've looked at some of the benefits to a coach mentor, haven't you, about and the things that they have gained being part of that role. So maybe let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So there were 2 key questions I asked. One is, the impact of mentoring and coaching on a system. So how have we been seeing that system? And for a lot of that, it's improved quality of teaching, defined, however, I know that there's a lot of discussion around, quality teaching and what that looks like. But that's what participants were talking about, that they're seeing this ripple effect of a real focus on student learning. And that was really beneficial. So there's one component of it was looking at the impact on the system at large. And the second part that I think you're asking me about was the question like, well, why do people take on this job? Like we have full-time jobs. Why would we then a volunteer to support other people on their journey? So what are we getting from it as mentor coaches? That intrigued me because there were people who had done it every single year. And some years it was a very time consuming. When someone was really struggling, it was texts every day. It was meeting up in the weekend. They took it very seriously as hoping to try to help someone through sometimes a really bad time, or sometimes, just to, if it was going really well, to push even further. And so there are lots of things that I've found, and I use the well-being framework. I was really interested, what's the impact on experienced teachers' professional learning? So what did they learn from this experience? And so for a lot of them, they talked about the mentoring and coaching, and learning coaching was fascinating, and it really pushed their experience and their learning, because they were feeling very confident in their classroom teaching. Yeah. So this was a whole new learning opening. So that they would say, I'm a great coach. And then when they start digging in, they're like, oh, coaching's more complex than I thought it was. Like there are specific skills to do to coaching. We talked about the way of being, and many of them already had that. Yeah. We talked about the different processes, so coaching models that you can use, and then also the coaching skills. So, the listening, the questioning, the summarizing, paraphrasing, noticing. And so as they started getting deeper, they're like, this is actually quite intense, and there's a whole field of research and work out there that I could learn. So that was really exciting for their own professional learning. And, you know, lots of them talked about how they were using it at home. They were taking coaching approaches with their kids, with their partners. And so it was useful for them in so many different ways. And so that was a professional learning. Their classroom practice changed, working with someone and having someone also in watching them teach.
Yeah.
It was really beneficial. They started reflecting a lot. You talked about self-reflection.
Yeah.
You know, like what was going on. They were reflecting on their own practice, and they got to learn. It's reciprocal, right? I think if we think that as a mentor, like I'm giving, I think the best mentors are receiving too, right? So this is kind of back and forth, and you gain all this opportunity to think differently and improve your own practice. And then I looked at well-being. So how do they feel? What does it gain for their own well-being? And the majority found it a very supportive structure for their own well-being.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think it links to some of the things I've read recently over the last couple of years about how well-being is often enhanced if we have a sense of purpose, a sense of something bigger than ourselves. And I think a lot of people that I meet as part of AP Connect in particular have that sense of wanting to make a difference, wanting to support other people, provide good help, and be able to contribute, you know, to something beyond themselves. And ultimately, I suppose that's what we see in education generally. People are motivated to help others, help others realize their own potential, that sort of thing, which is great, isn't it? But as you said, it's really interesting to start to unearth all of these other benefits or experiences of those that do the mentor coach type role, because it can be really hard.
Oh, it can be really hard, right? So, you know, for the majority of my participants, it was really great. But it was really also very challenging for a few, and they were not new to the process. So they were saying, you know, I don't know what's happened. It's, you know, it did not go well, and it was time consuming, and it added so much stress to their life. So they almost said it, you know, whereas some people found a very supportive structure for well-being, some found it contributed to their sense of ill-being. And for also people on the receiving end, you know, I really think we need to think about effective mentoring and coaching, and not just, you know, partnering people up and hoping for the best. Like, we need to have supports, because it also, for some of the people who are new to the district, it was actually detrimental. It made stress them out their whole year, working with this mandatory mentor coach that they were assigned to, and they had no power because the person is in the school, they have tenure, the administrative principals know them. So they're new, they want a job. So where do you go to say this is not working? And it was just so stressful for them. But in terms of the well-being framework, I used the Perma as a framework, and I just thought that was really useful as a way to think about how does well-being play out. So meaning was definitely some of it. Engagement in the coaching process, or as someone said, like, you never get enough PD to figure out how to get along with someone you don't get along with. You know, so like that, you're engaged and try to figure out, like, how do I get along with this person? Like, our relationship's not working. And then also, you know, the positive emotion, like this, they just really loved it, or the sense of accomplishment with someone other than you know, you supported and they've achieved their goals. That gives them such an accomplishment. So there were lots of different areas, and a lot of them talk about this lifelong relationship that they always have, even if the person doesn't stay in the school or even the system. They're still connected. They have shared this experience.
And for those who haven't heard of the Perma Model, it's a model created, I think, by Martin Seligman. He's a positive psychology researcher over in America, and I've got very into reading about that Perma Model recently, and I always, you know, don't always accept everything as it comes. There's things that I think about that I think, oh, it doesn't maybe consider this nuance or this bit, but actually it's really interesting as a model to think about well-being in that way. And like you said, the M is about meaning, and there's some real sort of useful bits of the framework there, isn't there, to think about how we experience things. And what I'm thinking is the relationship between the coach, a mentor, and the teacher is really important. And, what's coming into my mind is how sometimes that's just allocated without a consideration of how we allocate that or how we make those choices. So is there anything that's cropped up around relationships and how we can go about that, or what seems to be more effective than other things?
Wow, that's the hard part, isn't it? And so I was just at a session talking about, well, what are we going to do when teacher mentorship for the province? Like, how are we going to think about this? And people kept saying, well, what are the criteria? Like, what do we know makes a good mentor coach? I mean, and I think there are that way of being component. So, how we are, and ultimately, do we believe that everyone has the potential? Is that where you're starting from? Then that that you actually believe it, that in the human potential of others. So that would be a starting place. And then the skills that you can build on, I think you can become better at it. And when you have a chance to see and reflect and even record yourself, that gives you a lot of insight into how we are. But in our case, it's a selection process by the school principal.
Okay.
So how well does the principal understand and value the program? So in some cases, when they're really on board, they do an amazing job, and you can see how it helps and grows and it feeds the school climate. In other cases, they don't buy into this idea at all, and it's just something they have to do. And you can see it in sometimes how people are selected. You're like, really interesting choice. How we'll work with this, but it doesn't often go well. With some people, and then also, like whether or not they're going to support and build it themselves. A lot of our coaches have decided, maybe I don't only want to work with someone who is new to the school. I actually want to work with colleagues and use coaching, and they've gone on, branched off, and done their own thing. So it's exciting to see, but is it supported? And so the people in those positions are really important. How that gets directed, and we don't always have control over that.
No, and I think that is really interesting, because I'd say that's quite similar here, in that some colleges, some schools will have really effective coaching mentoring strategies and structures in place. Some will do it because they know it's got a benefit, but they don't quite know how or why, and so they've got something in place, but maybe not evaluating that through a critical lens, or not being open to exploring what makes it really effective. And so, every year we might have the same sort of program in place. You might just get that sort of random allocation of people, and relationships either work or don't work, and maybe sometimes that's by chance. And if it's not working, are people practiced enough, brave enough to have those difficult conversations about it not working, to be able to do something different? And that's an interesting place to be, isn't it? Because I've experienced really good coaching and also really bad coaching, and so that's hard, and both of those experiences sort of stick with you. And like you say, I often, when I talk to people about coaching and mentoring, the people who've had really positive experiences and relationships will still say to me, oh yeah, I still talk to that person. I still I still catch up with that person every now and again, like 20 years later or whatever that is, because it's been a really valuable experience. But yeah, I'm just thinking, about this, being critical about the competencies of coach mentors. What is the framework for that? Or can we have that sort of joint discussion and reflective discussion about what makes a good coach mentor, and then that critical evaluative discussion about what contributes to building good relationships, so that both people have a positive experience. So I'm going to encourage, we've got 5 minutes. I'm going to encourage people who are listening to drop us a comment or a question. Have you got anything that's popping up in your mind about coaching and mentoring? You know, Trista's here, so pick a brains if you have a question about coaching and mentoring, or her experience of researching coaching and mentoring. And I think for me, we'll just see if any questions come through, but we've probably not got enough time. It's a whole other chat about Jim Knight's work, and I know you look at all sorts of different people's work and different models, but that's relatively new to me over the last couple of years, but I've found some of that really inspiring. And for me, what struck me was this whole person development. So when we coach and mentor, and this links back actually to the live chat I had this morning with Steve and Ben, we talked about holistic development of people a little bit, and I think this is where coaching and mentoring really comes into that as well, in that this has to be, and often if you have that good coaching mentor relationship, the whole person is considered, and you have a real connection with that person, not just from a work performance point of view. Have you seen some of that come up? Have you what do you think about any of that?
Well, I think that's the essence of an effective coaching and mentoring relationship, that it's reciprocal, but it's also, the drivers are, if we're really shifting into the coaching stance, are the people who are termed coachee, or whatever you want to call the partner, their goals, and that you're there to support someone else's experience. I love the term accompaniment. So in Quebec, in the French, the accompagnement is a very common term, right? And I think we talked about it possibly last time, but it's, that I just really love this. You're beside someone, so you're not driving them, you're not behind them, pushing them. You're really beside them, and they're setting goals. And I think it's really important also to think about, for the mentor coach, in our case, we call them that, they also have goals. So one of the components, as someone who is in a leadership position, we designed as a group what our coaching competencies were. So like, these are just we made them up, what we thought were really important, and the characteristics, the key criteria. But then we'd ask the mentor coaches every term to set a goal that they were working towards with their mentor coach. And then that would be something written, a written reflection every term. So as part of the supporting group, I would be following up to see. And so that reflection part is built in for the mentor coach, as well as the person you're working with. And we ask them to set goals and set reflections. So you do something in writing and you're really thinking, and then that was written to the coach, and they would be able to respond and see how someone's thinking about the experience. So I think that's important, that whole person, that their goals are theirs. That it's not performance, it's not attached to evaluation, it's there because we want to work and learn something together. And that's our aim. So.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the main reasons that I ever got into education, which is about just supporting other people's development, growth, helping people to realize their potential. And my journey has, originally started in helping others to learn about science. That was my background. But then slowly over time has become about supporting other teachers to develop their practice, and then lead this sort of notion of teacher development practice and reflective practice, and trying to build these cultures where we are about people and we are about humans, and we're all about growth and evolution. And that's hard sometimes in a system that focuses on KPIs and goals and business as such. And whilst it's really important to appreciate that, they're not mutually exclusive. You find in some of the things that I've read that if we look after the whole person, the business kind of takes care of itself.
Yeah.
So for me, coaching and mentoring is kind of a bit of the magic around people feeling valued and trusted and supported in their jobs.
Yeah, it's a menu of choices, right? Like coaching, I worry sometimes that it's going to be implemented and it will be like the way.
Yeah.
I think it's a great process for many people. For me, it worked really well. For many colleagues, it worked well. So, but it's not the only way to support professional growth.
No.
And that people will start seeing, but it does have an impact, at least I've seen, in a culture and changing the climate to one of growth and professional learning as being prioritized. And it's something, that you can really develop and move forward. And to, if we really think, teacher well-being and support will mean that student well-being and support is present, then why aren't we spending our time supporting our teachers? And we know that there's some structures out there available.
Yeah.
It's a great place to start. And so for me, it's something we really need to think about and invite people to consider joining us on our journey.
Great. I want to say thank you.
Question.
Yeah, we've got some questions. So it's been interesting to listen. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Pamela, for the comments. Any tips on sort of collaborating and creating something around coaching competencies? So how did you identify them? I think you talked about sort of making them up somewhat, but I'm guessing you sort of just had that discussion about what makes a good mentor coach.
That's exactly what we did. We did it in one of our sessions, and that was the primary role, that you broke up into small groups to discuss, what do we do as coaches? Okay, so how do you sort of do a concept attainment to bring the idea of what's the key concept? So it could be around listening as one of the competencies. Again, I'm happy to share this out. I could share it to Stef, some of those coaching competencies, but they just emerged from the coaches themselves on what makes a strong coach, and they're not competencies that aren't that different from, other places. So you can look at frameworks that are invested and already in detail. So you can pull them apart. And for us, we ended up with 6 coaching competencies. And some of them were around professional learning. So their competencies were on their own development. So that was something they wanted to focus on. One was building relationships. And so some of them, that was what they stuck to as one of their goals, is to really try to figure out how to support this person and to make sure it's non-judgment relationship. That was the key the whole year, and you stick to developing and working on that. But the important thing, I think, is that it was self-evaluative and it didn't go anywhere else. Like, it was confidential. It would come to me as a part of a discussion point for the coach growth, but it certainly wasn't used for the coach to be decided whether they were effective or not. That's a whole nother area, because that's the question, right? We know that some people have, we know that people maybe aren't as effective. So what do you do in that context?
There's lots of complexities and nuances, isn't there? But we've ran out of time, and we've just started to get some cool questions through. However, this is definitely not the last conversation that I'll have with Trista, and we hopefully will be working on some stuff together anyway. So watch this space Twitter space as well. And we're really glad that people have found it useful, and it just started to evoke some sort of questions and thinking around coaching and mentoring. So thanks everybody for joining us, and thank you so much, Trista, for joining me today. It's been amazing to have you.
It's great to see you. Talk with everyone. Good luck on your journeys.
Thanks.